Conflict has plagued northern Uganda since 1986, when several rebel groups began violent protests of President Yoweri Museveni's government. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, all but one rebel group either had its demands met or negotiated a settlement with Museveni's government. Today, the country at large is developing and its economy growing, but the last remaining rebel group, the Lord's Resistance Army, continues to fight the government in the north, as well as from bases in neighboring countries. The LRA has kidnapped some 20,000 children to serve as soldiers or sex slaves, and today well over 1 million Ugandans live in squalid, displaced person camps. U.S. Institute of Peace fellow Betty Bigombe has been one of her homeland's lead negotiators, almost since the war began. On this trip, Bigombe visited displaced person camps and a boarding school for former child soldiers to see the war's impact firsthand.
I'm Betty Bigombe. I'm from Uganda. I have a history with this war in that all the way back in 1988, I was appointed the Minister of State for pacification of North and Northeastern Uganda. The whole purpose was that I should live in the affected area. At that time, I would say 1/3 of the country was at war. There were 4 different factions fighting the government. And the whole idea was, alongside military solution, my task was to try to see if I could end it by peaceful means. So that meant moving around in camps in different places and sitting down to talk with people. I needed to listen, because when people pick up weapons to go and fight, they know it's dangerous, so there must be some reason why they do so. I knew I was dealing with parents of rebels by going into camps. I knew I was dealing with brothers and sisters, and if through them I could get to know why they were fighting, then it would be a good start as to how we could bring a peaceful solution to the conflict. Uganda has a history from the colonial times. You see, what the British did was zoned off areas. There were those who were supposed to go to school and become civil servants, like Uganda in the central region. Then you had northerners whose job was to go into the armed forces. Being in the armed forces became an industry. It was a source of employment. So Museveni comes and pushed people here out of power. So they were jobless. And so they felt, well, we have no choice but to fight and regain our glory.
The LRA was formed by Joseph Kony, a charismatic but reclusive leader who has often been unresponsive to calls for negotiations. Kony's goal is to create a new Ugandan government based solely on the 10 Commandments. Bigombe is one of the very few people ever to have negotiated with Kony directly.
Joseph Kony is a kind of bizarre person. He was born in 1961 and grew up in a humble family. The story goes back, according to his mother, what she told me how the whole thing started was, he must have had cerebral malaria. And after that, he was silent for some time, and then disappeared, and then came back and said he had had a vision to lead his people to war. At the beginning, they were just abducting people, irrespective of age. But I think along the way, they did realize that children are adjusted very fast. They carried luggage. It was very easy to transform their minds, and they didn't question, and they moved fast, very, very fast. So they really resorted to abducting children.
Child abductions are not the LRA's only transgressions. In an effort to intimidate the local community, Kony's supporters have resorted to maiming and murdering innocent Ugandans.
They started turning against the community. They started cutting off their lips, amputating arms, limbs, cutting off women's breasts, nose, men's parts. One of the worst experiences I had was one day there were 3 men, 2 women who were caught by LRA early in the morning One of them was a tax collector, was just moving about his business. I think 2 were going into the garden. Others, they captured them. And with these machetes, which are not even sharp, but later they were given letters to come to me, and it was all very bloody. And at first I didn't even know people could survive after limbs have been amputated. Hours later, and they came, it was the most horrible sight.
In late 2006, prospects for peace in northern Uganda seemed closer than ever, but hopes began to fade as negotiators tangled over administrative details. Betty visited the region in early 2007 to try to bring both sides back to the table.
One of the things I've been doing in the past is, in the recent past, very recent past, is make contact to try to persuade LRA to see sense. There's also a problem, is that sometimes there's contradiction what the LRA fighters say and the LRA delegation says, that they're not on the same page.
The U.S. government has recently issued a statement of support for the peace process that Betty has been working toward since 1988. A statement of support alone, however, is not sufficient, says Betty.
The American people have the ability, like they've done in many cases, to rise up, right, and say, do something about this war. We have the means and we can do it. Just like you heard people expressing themselves in the camps. Why have you ignored us? Are we not a people? I remember my childhood very humble, 1 meal a day, walked miles to school. But there was this very basic human right I had, that I had a home to go to, and I didn't have to worry about my parents being killed or me being abducted. I want the war to end. I want people to live a normal life, decent life, that they can be in their own homes and be able to fend for themselves and not depend on handouts. I want children to go to school because there's no future here if children cannot go to school.